My name is Kenney, and this is my culture test video. I'll start with the inside. This is the name of my hometown with a safety net drawn under it. My hometown of Baldwinsville, New York is vastly white and middle class. I fit into both of those categories, and therefore I grew up in a place where my racial and economic identities were represented and validated wherever I went. My race and class were the default, and I rarely felt excluded from any groups. I never feared for my safety from the cops or my neighbors. Of course, these elements of white privilege are still with me today, although now I'm far more aware of them. Growing up with such material and racial security shaped my worldview. As a young adult, I saw the world as a fair place where hard work is rewarded. My whiteness allows me to assume that advantages are mine for the taking, and I move through the world as someone who assumes she will not encounter that many barriers. The safety net under my town represents the economic security I grew up with and continue to benefit from. My parents both went to college and were benefactors of modest generational wealth and were able to send my sister and I to college without burdening us with student loans. This afforded me a degree of financial security and the ability to save more than many millennials. I worked hard at an accounting job for many years, but I was able to save most of my paycheck and build my own safety net. I knew I could cover any unexpected expenses and would never go without necessities. This financial security shaped my worldview, and that it supported my belief that if you work hard and save your paycheck, you will never go without. Of course, now I know that's not true for many, many people, but I never had to live that reality. I no longer make accounting wages, but I still have that nest egg, and I am a lucky member of the middle class. The next thing is my diploma. This represents my identity as an educated person. I have a degree in accounting and human development. This fits into the matrix of domination, and that being born white and middle class basically guaranteed that I would go to college. My higher education granted me entry into white-collar spaces and got me a job at an accounting firm where I was seen as trustworthy and professional. Second, higher education also taught me about white privilege and the intersection of identities and oppression. In college, I began to understand how many unearned advantages I had due to my race and my class, and I began to see the world as less of a fair place and more of a place where systems of oppression keep people who look like me in power. This planted the seed of me eventually moving into social services work. The next thing is my YIMBY button. This represents my identity as a progressive Democrat. YIMBY is an organization that focuses on housing affordability. My political identity is a direct result of my education, wherein I was taught to see things through a social justice lens. My politics are fundamental to my worldview and shape the way I view issues like poverty and healthcare access. However, I have to acknowledge that progressivism and groups like YIMBY are often full of other highly educated people who are not affected by these issues. Not that the people affected by these issues are intentionally excluded from these groups, but the reality is that people who go to meetings and talk about housing policy are usually not the people who are actually facing eviction. My political identity allows me to acknowledge groups outside my own, but does not bring me any closer to actually understanding that experience. The flowers and female symbol represent my gender and sexual identity. I am biologically female, but also heterosexual and have stereotypical female traits. I'm sensitive, I wear makeup, I'm caring and nurturing by nature. The way that I look, the person I date, and my gender expression are all in alignment with my biology, so I always feel at home with groups of women. There are disadvantages to being a woman, but my race, class, and education have given me the extra boost to overcome those disadvantages. Being a woman has shaped my worldview in that I must take some extra care of my safety when I'm out alone, and I often think of my boyfriend or other men's desires as being more important than my own. I often catch myself looking for ways to care for the men in my life, even though my feminist education taught me otherwise. I also often feel excluded from male-dominated or very masculine groups. I feel uncomfortable or bulldozed in those settings, so I seek out more feminine spaces. Finally, the dumbbell. The dumbbell represents my identity as a young, thin, able-bodied person. My body works well, and I've never had to contend with access issues in physical spaces or manage a chronic illness. I think of the world as a place that was built for me. Airplane seats work for me, stairs, insurance plans, they all work for me. Since I don't often need sick time, I can take on projects at work that might boost my career and contribute to my future wealth. My identity as a young and able-bodied person grants me access to pretty much any physical space that I want and frees me from the burden of worrying about my health, and it means that my world can be as big as I want it to be. Now I'll move on to the outside of the box. The most important aspect on the outside of the box is the scales of justice. This represents my race with me here. I believe that my race is the most important social identity that heavily influences how people treat me. Many people view my whiteness as a reason to trust me, a reason to expect I won't steal, that I'm not a threat, and a reason to grant me inclusion in most spaces. However, in speaking with my clients and my friends of color, I've learned that sometimes my whiteness is viewed as a reason to assume I will not believe them when they speak about the oppression that they face, or I will minimize their fears of the police or dismiss their disadvantages. Of course, my impulse during these conversations is to tell them that of course I take them seriously and listen to them, but I have to acknowledge that they come about their assumptions of white people honestly, and I have to acknowledge my shortcomings in these areas. The next thing on the outside is the dress and the doormat. So this represents how people view my femininity. I'm stereotypically female in the way that I dress and in my personality, which influences how people treat me insofar as that sometimes I assume I'm a pushover, hence the doormat. People in my life with more masculine personalities will sometimes speak over me or disregard my preferences because I am softer spoken. Further, my feminine appearance affects how people treat me in that I am sometimes catcalled or spoken to suggestively. This makes me feel unsafe and vulnerable sometimes, and I notice that it happens less when I'm wearing baggy, less feminine clothes, which indicates that performing traditional femininity invites this verbal aggression. Of course, being traditionally feminine grants me many privileges, as I discussed earlier, but can also invite threatening or domineering behavior at the same time. The IUD here represents several intersections of social identity: age, gender, parental status, class, and education. I'm 30, which is an age at which many American women have already had their first child. However, I'm still advancing my career in education, so I use birth control. The IUD represents how some people might view someone like me as someone who is eschewing biology and selfishly putting her own needs before those of a potential family. On the other hand, the IUD also represents how a other group might view me as an educated, managerial class woman who will have children later due to her career. It also represents how I am more readily accepted by groups of childless women who are often younger than me than by groups of parents. Finally, the IUD represents education and class in that I have access to birth control and the knowledge of how to prevent a pregnancy until I am ready. So people might see me, a woman who has delayed childbirth, and assume a level of class and education commensurate with that choice. The junkie car here represents the way some people view my class. I know that I've spent time talking about my class privilege, but there's an additional layer to this. For the past 4 years, I've made less than $21 an hour as a case manager at a homeless services agency, and I've been supporting myself through grad school. So my cash flow is pretty low at the moment. My car is dented and rusted, doesn't work that well. My apartment is tiny, my clothes are old. I don't go without anything, but depending on who I'm talking to, I'm perceived as having class status or not. For example, my friends who, they all make more money than I do, they think of me as having low class status. You know, there are moments of discomfort when they want to go to a nice restaurant and I have to decline, which of course is not a hardship, but it does influence how my friends see my class status. On the other hand, many of my clients and other low-income people don't have cars at all, so they may see my junkie car as a sign of class privilege. This shows how the perception of social identity might not be fixed, and the way one is treated can be affected by comparison and expectation. Finally, the dictionary and glasses represent how I present as an educated person due to how I speak. People often comment on my vocabulary. I guess I use SAT words often. I was also in a program in college that emphasized public speaking. I'm very comfortable speaking in front of a crowd. This, along with my whiteness, of course, influences the way I'm treated in that people view me as smart and trustworthy. A concern here is that I think sometimes the way I speak could be alienating. One of my clients recently accused me of being a Yankee that I think he meant I was maybe being snooty. I certainly do not want to alienate anyone with the way that I speak, so this is something to be mindful of.